The first thing Evelyn Parker noticed was the sound of laughter. Not the polite kind adults make at school events, but real laughter, sharp, unfiltered, the kind that comes from children who haven't learned to hide yet. She stood at the edge of the Manhattan Community Center gym, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, watching her 12-year-old son, Leo, sprint across the floor with another child she'd never seen before. They moved like they'd known each other forever. Leo skidded to a stop, breathless, and threw an arm around the other kid's shoulders. The boy laughed so hard he nearly fell. For a brief, fragile moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: relief. Her son looked happy, truly happy. And lately, that had been rare. Then she felt it, that quiet pressure in her chest. The instinct she'd learned to trust after 12 years of surviving alone. She looked up. Across the gym, near the sign-in table, a man had just stepped inside. Tall, well-dressed, confident in the way only someone who had never worried about being dismissed could be. His hair was darker now, touched with gray at the temples, but his posture was the same, straight, certain, as if the room owed him space. Evelyn's breath caught. Julian Wright, her ex-husband. 12 years collapsed into a single second. The noise of the gym faded as memory rushed in. Hospital lights, legal papers, a locked phone, the sound of a door closing while she held a newborn and begged someone to stay. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup until the lid bent. Julian smiled at someone nearby, completely at ease. He looked like a man whose life had worked out exactly as planned. And then his eyes landed on Leo. Evelyn watched the change happen, the sharp focus, the calculation. Julian didn't look confused. He didn't look surprised. He looked confirmed. Her stomach dropped. Before she could move, Leo jogged over, face flushed with excitement. "Mom," he said, tugging at her sleeve, "this is Ivy's dad. He's here to pick her up. And guess what? Ivy and I are on the same team next week." Evelyn followed her son's pointing finger. A girl with dark braids stood beside Julian, her expression open, curious. She waved shyly. Julian stepped closer. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, like he'd practiced saying her name in front of a mirror. "It's been a long time." Her pulse roared in her ears. "What are you doing here?" Julian glanced down at Leo, then back at her. "Funny how life works," he said. "Our kids find each other, even when we try so hard to move on." She searched his face for something: guilt, hesitation, regret. There was none. Only that same calm control that had once convinced everyone she was the unstable one. Julian leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I always wondered when you'd stop hiding," he murmured. "I just didn't expect it to be like this." And in that moment, Evelyn realized this meeting wasn't an accident at all. That night, Evelyn Parker didn't sleep. The city outside her apartment never really went quiet, but she usually found comfort in its rhythm. The distant sirens, the low hum of traffic, the muted footsteps in the hallway. Tonight, every sound felt like an accusation. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Julian's voice again and again, the way he'd said her name like it still belonged to him. She rose before dawn, careful not to wake Leo. The kitchen light flickered on, revealing the small, practical space she'd built her life around. A second-hand dining table, a chipped mug, stacks of school forms and medical bills tucked neatly into a folder she pretended not to dread. This was the life she'd held together for 12 years, piece by piece, without anyone's applause. At 6:30, her phone buzzed. A message from the school district. "Please confirm availability for schedule review. Concerns have been raised regarding parental stability." Evelyn's hands went cold. She read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might change. They didn't. Her chest tightened, that familiar pressure she'd learned to breathe through. Julian had wasted no time. He never did. She packed Leo's lunch in silence, slipping a handwritten note inside like she always did. "You've got this. Love, Mom." When he came into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes still soft with sleep, she smiled the way mothers do when they're hiding a storm. "Big day?" he asked. She nodded. Always. After dropping Leo off, Evelyn took the subway downtown, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. She looked older than 39, not because of wrinkles, but because life had carved itself into her posture. She carried responsibility the way some people carried handbags, always there, never set down. At the school where she worked part-time as a counselor, whispers followed her, not loud enough to confront, just enough to notice. A colleague avoided eye contact. Another offered a tight smile that said, "I heard something." By noon, her supervisor called her in. "We just need to be cautious," the woman said gently, fingers folded over a pristine notepad. "With your history?" Evelyn swallowed. "My history?" "Your divorce, the custody situation. We want to make sure nothing disruptive affects the students." Disruptive. The word burned. She nodded, because that's what she'd learned to do. She left the office with fewer hours on next month's schedule and the familiar ache of being punished for something she'd never actually done. That evening, she sat alone at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out in front of her. Old court notices, medical records, a life reduced to documents. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering as if afraid of what she might find. One file caught her eye. An affidavit dated 12 years ago, her name at the bottom, her signature, and yet, staring at it now, Evelyn knew with absolute certainty she had never signed it. Her breath shook as she scrolled. Outside, the city lights flickered on, and somewhere across Manhattan, Julian Wright was smiling, certain she would break the way he'd always believed she would. By the third day, Evelyn could no longer pretend the situation would dissolve on its own. Leo talked about Ivy constantly. At breakfast, he mentioned how Ivy liked the same science podcasts he did. On the walk to school, he laughed about how they both hated timed math tests. That night, while Evelyn folded laundry on the couch, Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, building a small robot kit the program had assigned, explaining every piece as if Ivy were sitting right beside him. "She gets it, Mom," he said casually. "Like, she actually gets me." Evelyn froze mid-fold. Children didn't say things like that unless they'd been lonely for a long time. At the STEM program pickup that afternoon, she watched from a distance. Leo and Ivy sat shoulder to shoulder on the steps, heads bent together, whispering and laughing. They moved with an ease that made Evelyn's chest ache, the kind of ease she'd once dreamed her son might have with a sibling. She noticed something else, too. A man standing nearby, not Julian. This man was quieter, older than most of the parents there. He wore a simple jacket, no forced smile, no performance. He watched the kids the way professionals did, not possessive, not distracted, observant. When Leo waved goodbye to Ivy, the man stepped forward. "You must be Evelyn," he said gently. She stiffened. "Yes?" "I'm Samuel Reed," he said. "I'm one of the volunteer counselors for the program. I specialize in adolescent behavioral health." Something in his tone, respectful, grounded, made her exhale. "I noticed your son," Samuel continued. "He's bright, thoughtful, but he carries a lot." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Carries what?" "Responsibility," Samuel said after a beat. "Kids who grow up too fast usually do." Before she could respond, Julian appeared, as if summoned by the conversation. "Sam," Julian said warmly, clapping him on the shoulder. "Didn't expect to see you here." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Julian turned to her, smiling. "We know each other. Sam consulted for Ivy after the divorce." After the divorce. The phrase landed like a blade. Samuel's eyes flicked between them, his expression shifting, subtle, but unmistakable. Awareness. Recognition. "I didn't realize," Samuel said carefully, "that Leo is your son." Evelyn said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. Julian crouched beside Ivy, his hand firm on her shoulder. "You ready, sweetheart?" Ivy hesitated, then glanced back at Leo. "Can we work on the robot tomorrow?" Leo nodded instantly. "Yeah, tomorrow." As the children parted, Evelyn saw it clearly then. The reluctance, the unspoken disappointment. Two kids being pulled apart by adults who carried too many secrets. Samuel waited until Julian and Ivy were out of earshot. "You should know something," he said quietly to Evelyn. "Children don't bond that quickly without shared emotional patterns." Her heart pounded. "What does that mean?" "It usually means," Samuel said, voice low, "they recognize something familiar in each other's pain." Evelyn's hands trembled. Across the courtyard, Julian turned back once, his gaze sharp and satisfied. And Evelyn understood with terrifying clarity, this wasn't just about the past anymore. Their children were now part of the battlefield. The email arrived at 7:14 a.m., just as Evelyn Parker was tying her hair back in front of the bathroom mirror. Subject line, "Custody records verification required." Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. 12 years of experience had taught her one cruel lesson. Nothing with Julian Wright's shadow attached ever came without a cost. She sat on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on her knees, and clicked. The message was polite, professional, almost kind. The school district, it said, was conducting a routine review due to overlapping enrollment records connected to Leo Parker and Ivy Wright. For compliance purposes, they required confirmation of past custody arrangements. Attached was a PDF. Evelyn stared at the file name for a long moment before opening it. Affidavit of Parental Abandonment. The words blurred, then sharpened, as if her eyes were arguing with her brain. She scrolled slowly, her breath shallow. Dates, legal language, phrases she'd never used, claims she'd never made. And then, there it was, her full name typed neatly at the bottom. Evelyn Parker. Below it, a signature. Her signature. Her hands began to shake. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She zoomed in, studying the curves of the letters. It looked right at first glance, the slant, the spacing. But something was wrong. Subtle. Almost invisible to anyone who hadn't written that name 1,000 times on school forms, medical charts, and late-night notes to herself. The pressure was off. The stroke too confident. This wasn't hers. A cold wave of memory crashed over her. Hospital lights too bright. Leo crying in the bassinet. Julian standing too close, telling her she was exhausted, telling her to trust him, telling her he'd handle everything. She slammed the laptop shut. Her phone buzzed immediately. Julian. She didn't answer. Another buzz. A text. "We need to be adults about this. For the kids." Evelyn laughed once, a sharp, broken sound that startled her. Adults. As if adulthood meant rewriting history until the truth suffocated. At work, the atmosphere shifted. The receptionist avoided her eyes. A teacher paused mid-sentence when Evelyn entered the staff room. She felt it. The quiet distancing. The unspoken question forming behind polite smiles. What did she do? By lunchtime, her supervisor asked her to step aside temporarily until the records were clarified. Evelyn nodded, the world narrowing to a thin tunnel of sound and light. She walked out of the building on unsteady legs and sat on a bench, staring at the traffic streaming past like nothing had changed. Her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Julian. It was Hannah Moore. "I saw the filing," Hannah said without preamble. "Julian submitted it 12 years ago. It's been sitting there, uncontested." Evelyn's voice barely worked. "But it's fake." "I know," Hannah said quietly. And that's the problem. If he planted this back then, he's been waiting a long time to use it. Evelyn closed her eyes. Across the city, children were laughing, schools were buzzing, life was moving forward. And a single piece of paper was threatening to erase everything she had survived to build. Leo asked the question that night. Evelyn had been bracing herself for it all evening without knowing it. She moved through the apartment on autopilot, reheating leftovers, rinsing dishes that were already clean, straightening stacks of paper that didn't need straightening, anything to avoid sitting still long enough for her thoughts to catch up. Leo finished his homework at the kitchen table, unusually quiet. No humming, no tapping his pencil. When she glanced over, she noticed his shoulders were tense, his eyes fixed on a single line in his notebook as if it might accuse him of something. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded too fast. "Yeah." They ate in silence. Outside, the glow of passing headlights slid across the wall, disappearing as quickly as it came. Evelyn washed the dishes, listening for any change in Leo's breathing, any signal she'd learned to recognize as the start of a storm. It came when she least expected it. "Mom," Leo said suddenly, his voice small but steady. "Did you ever leave Dad?" The plate slipped in her hands and clattered into the sink. She turned slowly. Leo wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the table, his fingers tracing the wood grain over and over like he was trying to erase something. "Why would you ask that?" she said, already knowing the answer. He swallowed. "Some kid at the program said his mom heard that you walked out, that Dad tried to stop you." The room felt too tight, too close. Evelyn crossed the space between them and knelt beside his chair. "Leo," she said carefully, "who told you that?" He hesitated. "Ivy didn't say it. She looked confused, but her dad did. Not to me. To someone else." There it was. Julian hadn't even needed to speak to her son directly. He'd let the rumor do the work. Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, gathering the strength she hadn't known she'd need tonight. "No," she said firmly. "I didn't leave your father. He left us." Leo's head snapped up. "Then why does everyone say you did?" Because the lie was easier, she thought. Because it made him the hero and me the problem. Instead, she reached for his hands. Because sometimes the person who tells the story first gets believed, even when they're wrong. Leo's lip trembled. "I didn't know who to believe." The words cut deeper than any legal document ever could. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly, feeling his heartbeat racing against hers. "I need you to hear me," she whispered. "I would never leave you. Not for anything. Not for anyone." He pressed his face into her shoulder, his voice muffled. "I was scared." "I know," she said, tears finally spilling. "I know." They stayed like that for a long time, the weight of 12 years pressing into a single moment of truth. Later, after Leo went to bed, Evelyn sat alone in the darkened living room. Her phone buzzed with a message she hadn't opened. From Julian. "You don't have to make this ugly," it read. "Just tell the truth." She stared at the screen, her hands shaking, not with fear this time, but with rage. The truth. She finally understood what he was doing. He wasn't trying to win custody. He was trying to make her son doubt her. And that was something Evelyn Parker would never forgive. The letter arrived 2 days later, folded too neatly, sealed too carefully, as if its calm appearance might soften the damage inside. Evelyn Parker read it standing in the hallway, her coat still on, her keys slipping from her fingers onto the floor. "Notice of review regarding parental fitness." The words felt unreal, like something pulled from someone else's life. Her name was printed clearly at the top, followed by Leo's. Beneath it, a paragraph explaining that due to newly surfaced historical documentation, The district was required to assess whether any intervention was necessary. Intervention. Evelyn slid down the wall and sat on the cold floor. For 12 years, she had done everything right. She had worked through exhaustion, therapy, self-doubt. She had shown up. She had stayed. And now a system that had never once asked how she survived was suddenly questioning whether she was fit to be a mother. Her phone rang. Hannah Moore. "I heard," Hannah said without greeting. "Julian filed a supplemental request. He's pushing for an emergency review." Evelyn laughed weakly. "Emergency? Because our kids became friends?" "Because he framed it as concern," Hannah replied. "He's very good at that." That afternoon, Evelyn sat in a small conference room at the school district office. The walls were beige, the lighting too bright. Across the table sat two administrators she barely knew and a woman from child services with a clipboard balanced on her knee. They spoke kindly. That was the worst part. "We're not accusing you of anything," one of them said. "We just need clarity." Clarity, Evelyn thought, while they slid copies of the affidavit toward her. "That document is fraudulent," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I never signed it." The woman from child services looked up. "Do you have proof?" The question landed like a punch. Proof of what? Of her exhaustion? Of the night she'd begged Julian not to leave? Of the months she'd spent learning how to hold herself together while everyone else believed his version? "I have medical records," Evelyn said. "Witnesses, employment logs." "We'll review everything," the administrator said gently. "In the meantime, we recommend maintaining stability." Evelyn understood what they weren't saying. Don't cause trouble. Don't fight too hard. Don't look emotional. That evening, Julian called. She answered this time. "You're scaring people," he said calmly. "This doesn't have to go further." "You forged my signature," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "You let them think I abandoned my son." Julian sighed, as if she were being unreasonable. "You were struggling back then. You know that." "And you used that," she shot back. There was a pause, just long enough. "I'm trying to protect the kids," Julian said quietly, "from instability." Evelyn hung up. She sat at the kitchen table long after midnight. Paperwork spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Her hands trembled as she organized timelines, receipts, hospital discharge summaries. For the first time in years, fear crept in. Not for herself, but for Leo. If she lost this fight, she wouldn't just lose her reputation. She could lose her son. And somewhere across the city, Julian Wright was counting on that fear to break her. Evelyn met Claire Whitmore 3 days later, not by choice. The invitation came from the school, an informal alignment meeting, they called it. Parents, counselors, a neutral space. Evelyn knew better. Nothing about Julian Wright was informal. If Claire was coming, it meant Julian wanted witnesses. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive perfume. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, spine straight, reminding herself to breathe. She had learned long ago that stillness was her armor. The door opened. Claire Whitmore entered like she belonged everywhere she stood. She was tall, elegant in a tailored beige coat, her hair smooth and deliberate. A woman accustomed to being listened to, accustomed to being believed. When she smiled, it was warm, but controlled, the kind that didn't reach the eyes. "Evelyn," Claire said, extending her hand, "I've heard so much about you." Evelyn took it, feeling the firmness of her grip. "I wish it were under different circumstances." Claire tilted her head sympathetically. "So do I, especially for the children." Julian arrived last, as always, calm, grounded, the picture of concern. He placed a hand briefly at Claire's back, a silent claim. They sat. Claire spoke first. "I want to be very clear," she said gently, looking around the room. I don't see Evelyn as a villain. Life is complicated. Women struggle, especially after childbirth. Julian has always said that. Evelyn's jaw tightened. But, Claire continued smoothly, what concerns me is consistency, stability. Ivy thrives on routine, and suddenly there are questions. Questions. Evelyn leaned forward. What questions? Claire met her gaze without blinking. Why you disappeared? The words hit the room like glass. I didn't disappear, Evelyn said, her voice steady but low. I was pushed out. Julian sighed softly. Evelyn, this isn't helpful. Claire's expression softened, almost pitying. I think it's important to acknowledge the past honestly. Denial can be harmful. Denial. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest. You're talking about documents you've never seen, about a woman you didn't know 12 years ago. Claire smiled sadly. Julian showed me everything. Everything. The counselor cleared her throat, attempting balance. Perhaps we should focus on the present. Yes, Claire agreed quickly. The present, where two children are forming an intense bond, and we don't fully understand the emotional environment on both sides. Evelyn understood exactly what Claire was doing. She wasn't attacking. She was framing, making Evelyn sound fragile, unreliable, a risk. Claire turned to her then, voice low and earnest. If you ever felt overwhelmed back then, it's okay to admit it. It doesn't make you a bad mother. But pretending it didn't happen might. Evelyn's hands trembled beneath the table. She looked at Julian. He didn't stop Claire. He didn't correct her. He watched. And in that moment, something inside Evelyn shifted. Claire wasn't just repeating Julian's story. She believed it, or worse, she needed it to be true. As the meeting ended, Claire gathered her things, pausing beside Evelyn. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I hope this resolves peacefully. Evelyn looked up at her. So do I, she replied, because the truth always does. Claire hesitated, just for a second, and Evelyn saw it, the flicker of doubt that would later change everything. The first witness appeared on a Thursday morning, introduced so casually it almost worked. Evelyn was at home organizing medical records when Hannah Moore called. Her voice was tight, professional in a way that meant trouble. Julian submitted a sworn statement this morning, she said. He attached a witness declaration. Evelyn closed her eyes. From who? A former neighbor, Daniel Kruger, lived 2 floors below you 12 years ago. Evelyn's pulse spiked. The name rang faintly familiar, like a half-remembered sound from another life. She pictured the old apartment building, the narrow hallway, the flickering lights, the smell of cleaning solution that never quite covered mildew. I barely spoke to anyone back then, Evelyn said. That's what concerns me, Hannah replied. He claims he saw you leave, says you packed a suitcase and walked out while Julian begged you to stay. The words landed with surgical precision. Not dramatic, not cruel, just specific enough to sound real. By the afternoon, the declaration was already circulating. Not publicly, but in the quiet places that mattered. The school administration, the child services liaison, a counselor who suddenly wanted clarification. Evelyn felt herself shrinking inside a story she hadn't written. The statement was detailed, too detailed. It mentioned weather, time, even what she'd supposedly been wearing. She stared at the PDF, her hands cold. I don't own that coat, she whispered. That evening, Hannah came over. They spread documents across the kitchen table, timelines overlapping like mismatched transparencies. Here, Hannah said, tapping a date. He says you left on November 14th. Evelyn frowned. That's impossible. Why? Because Leo was still in the NICU that week. I never left the hospital. Hannah's eyes sharpened. You're sure? Evelyn stood and crossed to a cabinet, pulling out an old folder. She flipped through discharge summaries, visitation logs, wristband receipts. Then she found it. A hospital badge, time-stamped November 14th, 11:43 p.m. Her name, her photo. She'd been there all night. Hannah smiled grimly. Good, that's one crack. But Julian wasn't done. The next day, Evelyn ran into the witness himself. She was leaving the pharmacy when a man stepped into her path. Mid-50s, worn jacket, nervous smile. "Evelyn Parker?" he asked. Her stomach dropped. "Yes." "I'm Dan," he said quickly. "From the old building. I thought you should know. I didn't mean for things to get so serious." Her heart pounded. "What things?" He looked around, lowering his voice. "Julian contacted me. Said he just needed confirmation. He reminded me of how things were back then." "Did he tell you what to say?" Evelyn asked. Dan hesitated. "Just long enough." "He said you left," Dan muttered. "I thought maybe you did. It was a long time ago." Evelyn stared at him. "You never saw me leave?" Dan's jaw tightened. "I saw someone." "Who?" Silence, then barely audible. "I don't know." Evelyn stepped back, breath shaking. "You testified under oath." Dan rubbed his face. "I needed the money." Everything clicked. The witness, the timing, the confidence. Julian hadn't just rewritten history, he'd rented it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Evelyn felt something shift. Not fear, but certainty. Because liars always forget one thing: the truth leaves a trail. By the following week, Evelyn Parker stopped reacting. It wasn't a conscious decision. It happened quietly, the way exhaustion sometimes hardens into clarity. She woke up one morning, stared at the stack of papers on her kitchen table, and realized something fundamental had changed. Julian was no longer ahead of her. He was just louder. Evelyn met Hannah Moore in a small midtown office that afternoon, the kind with frosted glass and neutral art meant to keep emotions out of the room. Hannah laid everything out in clean rows: the affidavit, the witness statement, the hospital logs, the building access records. "Julian's strategy is pressure," Hannah said. "He's betting you'll collapse before the inconsistencies matter." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then we stop playing defense." Hannah looked up. "What are you thinking?" "I want everything," Evelyn said. "Every file he touched, every email, every submission he's made in the last 12 years. Hannah's expression shifted, from caution to something sharper. "That opens doors," she said, "but it also escalates." "So be it." That same evening, Julian made his move. Evelyn learned about it through Leo. "They asked me questions today," Leo said quietly as they sat on his bed. "At school. About you." Her heart clenched. "What kind of questions? If you ever forgot to pick me up, if you got sad a lot, if I ever felt scared." Evelyn closed her eyes. Julian had crossed a line. "They said they were just checking," Leo added, "but it didn't feel like that." Evelyn took his hands. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly, "and you don't have to answer anything without me there. Ever." After Leo fell asleep, Evelyn sat in the dark, her phone glowing in her hands. There was a message waiting, from Claire Whitmore. "We need to talk. Alone." Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Tomorrow. Public place." They met at a quiet cafe near the river, late morning. Claire arrived dressed simply this time. No polished smile, no practiced warmth. She looked tired. "I reviewed the affidavit again," Claire said without preamble. "And the witness statement." Evelyn waited. "There are discrepancies," Claire continued. "Dates that don't align. Language Julian doesn't usually use." Evelyn leaned forward. "You're just noticing that now?" Claire flinched. "I trusted him." "So did I," Evelyn said softly. Claire hesitated, then reached into her bag. There's something else. An old backup drive. Julian kept it in a locked drawer. I didn't know what it was until recently. She slid it across the table. Evelyn's breath caught. Claire's voice dropped. I think he's done this before. The weight of the moment settled between them. Across the city, Julian Wright was still confident, still smiling, still telling his version of the story to anyone who would listen. He didn't know yet that the narrative he'd controlled for 12 years was beginning to slip, and Evelyn Parker wasn't running anymore. She was coming for the truth. The backup drive sat between them like a confession. Neither woman was ready to speak out loud. Evelyn didn't take it home right away. She didn't trust her hands to stay steady or her thoughts to stay quiet. Instead, she walked the long way back to her apartment, past storefronts and traffic and strangers who had no idea her entire past might be hiding inside a piece of plastic small enough to fit in her palm. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Evelyn finally plugged the drive into her laptop. Folders opened slowly, as if resisting. Dates, names, scans, old email chains, financial spreadsheets, and then a folder labeled simply Medical E. Her breath caught. Inside were documents she had never seen before, hospital discharge summaries, consultation notes, medication records. She scrolled, heart pounding, until one line stopped her cold. Patient administered sedative due to acute distress. Consent signed by spouse. Spouse. The room tilted. Evelyn pressed her fingers to her temple, and memory came rushing back in broken flashes. Bright lights, a nurse asking her to breathe. Julian's voice, calm and close, telling her everything would be fine if she'd just signed. Telling her she was exhausted, that she couldn't think clearly, that he'd protect the baby. She hadn't remembered the medication. She hadn't remembered the signature, because she hadn't been able to. Evelyn's chest tightened as she scrolled further. The timestamp matched the night Julian claimed she'd walked out. The same night the affidavit was dated. The same night she'd been labeled unstable, unreliable, absent. Her hands shook as she closed the laptop. Across the city, Leo turned in his sleep, unaware that the ground beneath his childhood was finally shifting. The next morning, Claire called. Her voice was different now, stripped of polish. I spoke to Julian last night, she said. I asked him about the medical records. Evelyn said nothing. He told me you were confused back then, Claire continued, that you asked him to handle things. And did you believe him? Evelyn asked quietly. There was a pause. I believed him for years, Claire said. But not anymore. They met again, this time in Claire's car, parked along a quiet street. Claire handed Evelyn a printed page. It's an email Julian sent to himself, she said. 12 years ago. Drafted, edited, then forwarded. He practiced the narrative. Evelyn read the subject line. In case of custody dispute. Something inside her hardened. Julian hadn't reacted in the moment. He had planned. That afternoon, Hannah confirmed what Evelyn already knew. Consent signed under sedation can be challenged, Hannah said, especially if it led to legal consequences. So he drugged me into silence, Evelyn said flatly. He took advantage, Hannah corrected, and that matters. When Evelyn picked Leo up from school, she noticed the way he watched her, closely, carefully, as if measuring something. You okay, Mom? He asked. She smiled, kneeling in front of him. I am now. That night, Julian left her a voicemail. You're digging up things that don't need to be revisited, he warned. Be careful. Evelyn deleted it without listening twice. For 12 years, Julian Wright had counted on her memory being unreliable. He never counted on the records remembering for her. The mediation was scheduled for Monday morning, deliberately early, deliberately formal. Evelyn understood the message the moment Hannah forwarded the notice. Julian wanted control. Fluorescent lights, neutral walls, authority in the room. He wanted her tired, intimidated, and on record. She didn't sleep much the night before. At dawn, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, smoothing her jacket, practicing the calm expression she'd learned over years of being dismissed. Not defensive, not emotional, steady. Leo was still asleep when she left, his backpack by the door, his trust heavier than any document she carried. The mediation room was smaller than she expected. Beige walls, a long table, bottled water no one touched. Julian was already there when she arrived, seated comfortably beside Claire, his posture relaxed. His hand resting lightly on the table like he owned it. He smiled when he saw her. Not kind, not cruel, confident. "Evelyn," he said, "I'm glad you came." She took her seat without answering. The mediator began with practiced neutrality, outlining goals, reminding everyone they were there, for the children. Julian nodded at all the right moments. Claire kept her eyes on her notepad. Then Julian spoke. "I want to resolve this peacefully," he said, "but Evelyn has been revisiting things that were settled years ago. It's destabilizing." Evelyn felt the word land like a trap. "She's been contacting witnesses," Julian continued, "reframing events. It concerns me." The mediator turned to her. "Ms. Parker?" Evelyn inhaled slowly. "I'm responding to evidence that was hidden from me." Julian sighed softly. "You were struggling back then. We all knew it. I stepped in." "You took advantage," Evelyn said evenly. Julian leaned back. "This is exactly what I mean." The mediator raised a hand. "Let's stay focused." Julian slid a folder across the table. "I'm prepared to offer a compromise. Limited contact between the children, supervised at first, until things stabilize." Evelyn's heart pounded. He was asking her to accept his version of the past to protect her son's present. Claire shifted beside him. "Julian," she said carefully, "we didn't discuss this." Julian didn't look at her. "It's practical." Evelyn spoke before fear could stop her. "You're not protecting the children. You're protecting the lie." Silence filled the room. Julian's jaw tightened. "Careful." "No," Evelyn said, meeting his eyes. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness for 12 years. The mediator cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should pause." Julian leaned forward, voice low. "If you don't agree today, this goes further. Investigations, evaluations, your job." Evelyn felt the threat, but it didn't crush her this time. She reached into her bag and placed a single document on the table. "I don't agree." Julian glanced at it, then froze. The room shifted. Claire leaned in, reading, her face draining of color. Julian looked up slowly. "Where did you get that?" Evelyn's voice was calm. "From your past." For the first time since she'd walked into that room, Julian Wright looked unsure. And Evelyn knew this meeting hadn't broken her. It had exposed him. The room didn't explode after Evelyn placed the document on the table. That was what made it terrifying. The mediator leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Claire's fingers tightened around her pen. Julian didn't speak at all. He stared at the paper as if it were something alive, something that might bite if he moved too quickly. "What is this?" the mediator asked. Evelyn answered calmly. "Medical documentation from the night my son was born. Records that explain why I don't remember signing anything afterward." Julian let out a short laugh. "This is ridiculous. Postpartum stress doesn't erase accountability." "It does when medication is involved," Evelyn replied, "especially when consent is signed under sedation." That finally got him. Julian's head snapped up. "You're saying I drugged you?" "I'm saying you signed for it," Evelyn said evenly. "And you used it." Claire looked between them, confusion flickering into something darker. "Julian," she said quietly, "did you know she was sedated?" Julian exhaled sharply. "She was unstable. The doctors recommended it." Did they recommend using that moment to file legal documents? Claire pressed. The mediator raised a hand. Mr. Wright, did you submit the affidavit the same night? Julian hesitated, just for a second. Yes, he said, because things needed to be handled. The silence that followed was suffocating. Evelyn felt her pulse in her ears, but she didn't waver. That night, she said, I couldn't stand without help. I couldn't focus my eyes, and you asked me to sign papers you claimed were temporary. Julian shook his head. You're rewriting history. No, Evelyn said softly. I'm remembering it. She turned to the mediator. There are timestamps, medication logs, a nurse's note indicating spousal consent, and an affidavit dated less than 2 hours later. Claire's face drained of color. You told me she walked out, she whispered. You said she left voluntarily. Julian's voice hardened. I said what made sense. Claire pushed back from the table. For who? The mediator closed her folder slowly. This meeting cannot proceed without further review. Julian stood abruptly. This is turning into a witch hunt. Evelyn rose as well, her voice steady. You made it one the moment you decided my memory was disposable. Claire stared at Julian, really seeing him now. How many times? She asked quietly. How many stories did you rewrite? Julian said nothing. Outside the building, Evelyn's legs finally gave out. She sat on the steps, hands shaking, breath shallow. Hannah knelt beside her. You did exactly what you needed to do, she said. I didn't remember any of it, Evelyn whispered. You weren't meant to, Hannah replied. That was the point. Evelyn closed her eyes, tears spilling freely for the first time, not from fear, but from release. For 12 years, she had been blamed for forgetting. Now she understood. The forgetting had been engineered, and the truth Julian Wright buried that night was finally crawling its way back into the light. Claire Whitmore didn't go home after the mediation. Instead, she sat alone in her car for nearly an hour, staring at the building's glass doors as people came and went, unaware that her marriage had just cracked open. When she finally called Evelyn, her voice was stripped of every layer of composure she'd worn so carefully. I need to show you something, Claire said, and I need you to understand. I didn't know. Not then. Not until now. They met that evening in Hannah Moore's office. No mediator, no polished neutrality, just 3 women and a truth that no longer fit inside a single story. Claire placed a slim laptop on the table. Her hands shook as she opened it. Julian keeps backups, she said. He always has. He calls it being prepared. She pulled up a series of folders, mirrored drives, archived emails, scanned documents. Hannah leaned forward, her expression sharpening with each click. This isn't just about you, Hannah said quietly. Claire nodded. I found records from before me, before our marriage. Evelyn's breath caught. Emails appeared on the screen, dated years apart but written in the same tone. Calm, reassuring, strategic. Each one framed a woman as unstable, emotional, unreliable. Each one ended with Julian offering to handle things for the sake of the children. There were 3, Claire said softly, including you. Evelyn sat back, the room spinning. She wasn't the exception. She was the pattern. Hannah scrolled further. Here, she said, pointing. Look at the metadata. Same device, same IP address. He drafted these narratives before the events even happened. Claire swallowed hard. He rehearsed outcomes. Evelyn felt something inside her settle, not relief, not anger, but clarity. For 12 years, she had wondered what flaw in her had made Julian leave, manipulate, erase. Now she saw the truth with brutal simplicity. It had never been about her. Julian entered relationships the way others entered negotiations. Claire closed the laptop and looked at Evelyn. I believed him because it was easier. Because admitting this means admitting who I married. Evelyn met her gaze. And now? Now I choose not to protect him. Hannah leaned back, exhaling slowly. This changes everything. This isn't a custody dispute anymore. This is a history of coercive control. The word hung in the air. Claire nodded. I'll testify. I'll release the files. Whatever it takes. Evelyn felt tears rise, unexpected and sharp. You don't owe me that. Claire shook her head. I owe my daughter the truth. Outside, the city moved on. Taxis honking, lights flashing, lives continuing without pause. But inside that room, something irreversible had happened. Julian Wright's power had depended on isolation, on each woman believing she was alone. Now the pattern was visible, and patterns, once exposed, are impossible to defend. As Evelyn gathered her things, Hannah placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You're not fighting him anymore, she said. You're standing in front of him. Evelyn nodded. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't bracing for the next blow. She was watching the structure he built start to collapse under its own weight. The second mediation wasn't scheduled as a mediation. It was called a procedural review, a phrase so dull it disguised its true purpose. By the time Evelyn walked into the government building that morning, she understood exactly why Julian had agreed to it. He believed the setting itself would protect him. Neutral ground, official titles, process over people. He was wrong. The room was larger this time, with a long table and microphones fixed in place. A representative from Child Services sat at one end, flanked by a legal observer and the same mediator from before. Hannah sat beside Evelyn, her posture relaxed but alert. Claire arrived separately and took a seat across from Julian. Julian didn't look at her. He looked at Evelyn. And for the first time, there was no confidence in his eyes, only calculation stretched thin. The session began calmly. The mediator summarized the findings so far: conflicting affidavits, medical documentation, witness inconsistencies, and newly surfaced digital evidence. Each item landed like a quiet blow. Julian's jaw tightened, his foot tapping beneath the table. When it was his turn to speak, Julian leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "This has gone too far," he said sharply. "What started as concern for my daughter has turned into character assassination." Claire lifted her head. "You mean accountability?" Julian turned to her, incredulous. "You're taking her side now?" "I'm taking the truth side," Claire replied evenly. "Something you've avoided." A murmur rippled through the room. Julian laughed, short and bitter. "You're all overreacting. Evelyn was unstable. That's the truth no one wants to say." Evelyn didn't move. The Child Services representative looked up. "Mr. Wright, do you have any medical qualifications to make that assessment?" Julian hesitated. "I was her husband." "That doesn't grant authority," the woman replied. Julian's voice rose. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Evelyn said quietly, finally speaking. "You did what benefited you." He rounded on her. "You were a risk." The room went still. Claire stood abruptly. "Stop," she said. "Just stop." "Listen to yourself." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "You think you know me?" "I know enough," Claire said, her voice shaking but firm. "I found the files, the drafts, the backups. You didn't react. You planned." Julian froze. The mediator spoke carefully. "Mr. Wright, given this pattern, the board has serious concerns regarding coercive behavior." Julian pushed back from the table, breathing hard. "This is insane." "No," Hannah said calmly. "This is exposure." The room seemed to shrink around him. Julian's mask, the composed father, the reasonable ex-husband, cracked under the weight of his own words. He looked at Evelyn then, not with control, but with fury. "You're destroying everything." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "You destroyed it the night you decided my memory was expendable." Silence followed. The mediator closed her folder. This review will escalate to a formal investigation. Julian opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. For the first time, he understood something he'd never planned for. The system he'd manipulated was no longer on his side, and everyone in the room could see it. The call came from an unexpected number. Evelyn was standing at the stove, stirring soup she hadn't tasted in days, when her phone vibrated against the counter. She almost ignored it. Almost. Something made her answer. "Miss Parker?" a woman asked gently. "This is Dr. Renee Lawson. I'm a licensed child psychologist assigned to Ivy Wright." Evelyn's grip tightened around the spoon. "Is something wrong?" "No," Dr. Lawson said carefully. "But something is different. And I believe you need to hear it." They met the next afternoon in a quiet office with soft lighting and shelves lined with children's drawings. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, heart pounding, as Dr. Lawson reviewed her notes. "Ivy has been experiencing anxiety," she explained. "Nightmares, somatic symptoms. But what concerns me most is her language." Evelyn looked up. "What do you mean?" "She speaks in rehearsed phrases," Dr. Lawson said. "Adult language, legal language, as if she's repeating something she was coached to say." Evelyn's breath caught. Dr. Lawson hesitated, then continued. "Yesterday, Ivy asked me if telling the truth could get her in trouble." The words landed like a weight. "What did you say?" Evelyn whispered. "I told her the truth is meant to keep people safe," Dr. Lawson replied. And then she cried. Dr. Lawson slid a paper across the desk. She drew this afterward. It was a child's drawing. Simple lines, uneven colors. 2 houses, one with a smiling stick figure family, the other darker, with one figure standing alone. Above it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Don't say it wrong." Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth. "Ivy disclosed something important," Dr. Lawson said softly. "She said her father told her what to say about you, that if she didn't, things would get very bad." The room felt too small to hold Evelyn's breath. "She wants to talk," Dr. Lawson continued. "But she's terrified. I'm obligated to report this." Evelyn nodded slowly. "She shouldn't be afraid." "No," Dr. Lawson agreed, "and she shouldn't be carrying adult secrets." That evening, Claire called. Her voice broke before she finished the first sentence. "Ivy told me everything." Evelyn closed her eyes. "She said Julian practiced answers with her," Claire said, "that he warned her not to trust her feelings, that he said loving you was confusing." Claire inhaled shakily. "I didn't know how deep it went." Evelyn spoke quietly. "Now you do." The formal interview happened 2 days later. Evelyn wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. Ivy sat with Dr. Lawson, a social worker, and a recorder on the table. Her small hands twisted in her sleeves as she spoke. Slowly at first, then faster, words tumbling out once the fear loosened its grip. She talked about the scripts, the reminders, the consequences. When Julian learned Ivy had spoken, he didn't deny it. He raged. The messages came in rapid succession. Accusations, threats, pleas. Evelyn didn't respond, because this time, it wasn't her word against his. It was a child's truth, and no amount of control could put those words back once they were spoken. As Evelyn tucked Leo into bed that night, he looked up at her with quiet certainty. "You're not losing, are you?" She brushed his hair back gently. "No," she said. "We're being heard." For the first time since this began, the tide didn't just shift. It turned. Julian Wright did not fall apart all at once. That was what surprised Evelyn the most. There was no dramatic arrest, no shouting match in public, no instant justice. Instead, the consequences arrived the way real ones often do, quietly, methodically, and without asking his permission. It began with an email. Claire received it first. A formal notice from Julian's employer requesting an internal compliance interview. The subject line was bland, almost harmless, but Claire knew what it meant. Allegations involving coercion, falsified records, and ethical violations had reached the wrong desk. The kind of desk that didn't look away. When Claire forwarded the message to Evelyn, she didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. Julian called that night. Evelyn watched the phone vibrate on the counter, his name flashing like a warning sign she no longer feared. She let it ring out. Then again. Then again. The voicemail that followed was different from the others, not angry, panicked. "This has gone too far," Julian said, his voice tight. "You need to tell them this is a misunderstanding." Evelyn deleted it. 2 days later, Hannah confirmed the escalation. "Child Services has filed a formal report," she said. "Not against you. Against him." Evelyn closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of that sentence. "They're recommending supervised contact only," Hannah continued. "Effective immediately." Julian found out at the same time. He didn't show up to pick up Ivy that Friday. Instead, a court-appointed supervisor arrived. Clipboard, neutral tone, firm boundaries. Ivy clutched Claire's hand, confused but calm, as the rules were explained. Julian stood frozen in the driveway, jaw clenched, watching controls slip through his fingers, one condition at a time. That weekend, rumors surfaced, not gossip, facts. A former colleague reached out to Hannah. Another woman's name appeared in an affidavit. Patterns repeated. Files emerged. Julian's carefully managed image began to fracture in professional circles that valued reputation over charm. Evelyn didn't celebrate. She cooked dinner, helped Leo with homework, took a long walk at dusk, letting the city breathe around her. Justice, she was learning, didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply corrected the record. Claire filed for separation the following week. She didn't ask Evelyn's permission. She didn't seek absolution. She made the decision the way someone does when the last illusion finally shatters. "I can't raise my daughter in a house built on fear," Claire said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "Neither could I." The official letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Julian's custodial privileges were under review pending investigation. His access limited, his narrative no longer controlling the room. When Evelyn told Leo, she watched his shoulders relax in a way they hadn't in months. "So, he can't mess with things anymore?" he asked. "Not like before," she said honestly. Leo smiled, small but real. "Good." That night, as Evelyn sat by the window, city lights flickering below, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not triumph, relief. Because for the first time in 12 years, Julian Wright wasn't deciding what happened next. And Evelyn Parker finally was. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, slipped beneath Evelyn Parker's door without ceremony. No knock, no announcement, just a thick envelope bearing an official seal she'd learned to dread over the past months. For a long moment, she stood in the hallway staring at it, her heart pounding. Not with fear this time, but with something closer to disbelief. She opened it slowly. After review of submitted evidence, witness testimony, and professional evaluations, this office finds no basis for claims of parental abandonment or instability regarding Ms. Evelyn Parker. Evelyn had to sit down. She read the sentence again. Then again. Her hands trembled as she turned the page, scanning for the catch she'd learned to expect. There wasn't one. The document continued, clinical and precise. The affidavit filed 12 years ago was deemed compromised. The witness statement unreliable. The circumstances surrounding her medical condition at the time were recognized as mitigating and coercive, and then the words she never thought she'd see in writing, Ms. Parker's parental record is hereby corrected. Corrected. Tears blurred the page. For 12 years, she had lived with an invisible stain. Whispers, assumptions, polite distance. She had carried the burden quietly, believing that surviving was enough. Now, in black ink on white paper, the truth stood where the lie had lived for far too long. The school district followed within hours, a formal apology, carefully worded but unmistakable. Her supervisor called personally, voice tight with discomfort. "We mishandled this," the woman admitted. "Your position is reinstated, with full hours, and we'd like to discuss a permanent role." Evelyn thanked her, calm and composed, then hung up and pressed her forehead to the table as the weight finally lifted. When she told Leo, he didn't cheer. He smiled, a deep, quiet smile that reached his eyes. "So they know now," he said. "Yes," Evelyn replied softly. "They do." That afternoon, Evelyn walked into the community center gym for the first time without feeling watched. Parents nodded at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with recognition. A few offered awkward apologies, others simply moved aside, making space. Across the room, Samuel Reed caught her eye. He didn't rush over. He didn't intrude on the moment. He waited until Leo joined a group of kids, then approached, his expression warm but measured. "I heard," he said gently. Evelyn nodded. "It's over." Samuel smiled. "No, it's been set right." Nearby, Ivy laughed as she kicked a ball toward Leo, the sound light and unburdened. Claire watched from a distance, her posture calmer now, no longer braced for impact. Evelyn felt it then, the shift she hadn't allowed herself to imagine, the future opening in small, careful ways. That night, she framed the letter and placed it on the shelf beside family photos, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The lie no longer defined her. The truth did. And for the first time since this story began, Evelyn Parker wasn't standing in defense of her past. She was stepping forward into her life. Julian Wright's downfall did not come with a headline. It came with doors quietly closing. Evelyn learned about it the way most real consequences unfold, indirectly, through absences and silences that spoke louder than confrontation ever could. A mutual acquaintance mentioned Julian hadn't been at a recent board meeting. A school administrator casually noted that all future communication would now go through legal channels. Even Claire stopped using his last name when she spoke. The first official notice arrived a week after Evelyn's record was cleared. Julian's employer placed him on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation. Allegations of falsified documentation, coercive behavior, and ethical misconduct were now part of an internal review he couldn't charm his way out of. His carefully curated professional image, the reliable executive, the family man, had been reduced to a liability. When Julian showed up at the supervised visitation center, he looked smaller. Not physically, but stripped of the confidence that had once filled every room he entered. He spoke carefully now, watched closely by a third party with a clipboard, and no interest in his excuses. Ivy sat across from him, polite but distant, her answers short, her body angled away without even realizing it. Julian noticed. For the first time, he couldn't correct the narrative. At home, Evelyn felt the aftershocks in quieter ways. Her phone no longer buzzed with threats, no late-night voicemails, no veiled warnings. Julian had gone silent, not because he was remorseful, but because he had finally run out of leverage. Claire finalized the separation paperwork without drama. "I thought leaving would feel louder," she admitted one afternoon, watching Ivy play in the park. "But it feels clean." Evelyn nodded. That's what honesty does. The legal consequences followed methodically. Julian's request for expanded custody was denied. His past filings were flagged for review. The witness who had testified against Evelyn formally recanted, submitting a sworn statement acknowledging financial coercion. Each development landed like a weight added to a scale that had been tipped in Julian's favor for years. And now, finally, it balanced. Evelyn didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She reclaimed. She took Leo out for dinner on a random Tuesday, letting him order dessert without checking the price. She accepted the full-time counseling position offered by the district, a role that trusted her judgment instead of questioning her stability. She slept through the night for the first time in months. One evening, as she and Leo walked home under soft streetlights, he looked up at her and asked, "Is Dad okay?" Evelyn chose her words carefully. "He's facing the consequences of his choices." Leo nodded, processing that. "So, the truth matters." "Yes," she said, "even when it takes a long time." Across the city, Julian Wright sat alone in an apartment that no longer felt like a fortress. His phone was quiet, his calendar empty. The story he'd controlled for 12 years no longer belonged to him. And Evelyn Parker didn't need to look back to know this much was true. He hadn't just lost the case. He had lost the power to define her. Healing didn't arrive as a single moment. It arrived in fragments. In the weeks that followed Julian's collapse, Evelyn Parker began to notice the quiet changes first. The absence of dread when her phone buzzed, the way her shoulders no longer tightened when she walked into school meetings, the simple relief of not rehearsing explanations for a crime she had never committed. On a Sunday morning, she sat at the small kitchen table with Leo, sunlight spilling across their plates as they shared pancakes she'd burned slightly on one side. Leo didn't tease her about it like he used to. He just ate, smiling, comfortable in a way he hadn't been in a long time. "You seem lighter," he said casually, pouring syrup. Evelyn paused. "Do I?" "Yeah," he nodded. "Like you don't look tired all the time." The words caught in her chest. She hadn't realized how visible the weight had been. Therapy became a routine instead of a crisis response, not because something was wrong, but because she was finally allowed to ask who she was without survival dictating every answer. She learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about no longer living inside it. One afternoon, after a session, Evelyn walked through Central Park instead of heading straight home. She sat on a bench and watched parents chase toddlers, couples argue quietly, joggers pass without noticing her at all. Normal life, something she'd been denied for years by a story that wasn't hers. Samuel Reed found her there one evening. Not intentionally, just coincidence. "I was hoping I'd run into you," he admitted, standing a respectful distance away. "But I didn't want to intrude." Evelyn smiled. "You're not." They talked easily. About work, about Leo's love for science, about Ivy's growing confidence now that she wasn't carrying secrets too big for her age. Samuel didn't push. He didn't analyze. He simply listened. At one point, he said quietly, "You know, most people don't survive what you did without losing themselves." Evelyn looked at him. "I thought I had." "You didn't," Samuel said. "You protected yourself until it was safe to come back." The words stayed with her. Weeks later, Evelyn accepted the full-time counseling role officially. Her office was small but bright, decorated with drawings from students who trusted her because she understood what it meant to be misunderstood. She framed one drawing in particular, a child holding a sign that read, "You believed me." At home, Leo thrived. His laughter came easier. His questions were curious instead of anxious. The house felt lived in, not braced for impact. One night, as Evelyn tucked him in, Leo looked at her seriously. "You didn't give up, did you?" he asked. She brushed his hair back gently. "No, I just waited for the truth to catch up." After he fell asleep, Evelyn stepped onto the balcony, city lights stretching endlessly before her. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't rebuilding after damage. She was building toward something new, and it felt earned. The invitation was simple. No heavy paper, no embossed letters, just a message sent on a quiet Friday afternoon, asking a small group of people to gather at the edge of Central Park just before sunset. Evelyn Parker almost laughed when she read it. After everything, the hearings, the documents, the fear, this felt almost too ordinary. That was the point. She arrived with Leo just as the sky softened into gold. The city hummed behind them, alive and indifferent, as it always had been. A few familiar faces stood near a low stone terrace. Hannah, Claire with Ivy at her side, and Samuel Reed, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. Leo noticed it first. "Why does Sam look like he's about to give a presentation?" he whispered. Evelyn smiled. "I'm not sure." Samuel stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I wanted to say something," he began, glancing at the small group. "And I wanted witnesses, not because this is dramatic, but because truth deserves to be shared." Evelyn's breath caught. "For a long time," Samuel continued, his voice steady now, "Evelyn lived inside a story someone else wrote for her. One that tried to define her by her weakest moment instead of her strength." He turned to her. "But what I've seen is a woman who protected her child, faced the truth, and refused to pass pain forward." Leo's eyes widened. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. No theatrics, no spectacle. "Evelyn Parker," he said gently, "would you marry me?" For a moment, the world narrowed to a single sound, her heartbeat. She thought of the woman she'd been 12 years ago, silenced, doubted, erased. She thought of the years spent surviving instead of dreaming. And she realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't a rescue. This was a choice. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, sure. "I will." Leo broke into a grin so wide it made everyone laugh. Ivy clapped softly, then hugged her mother. Claire wiped at her eyes without apology. Later, as the group dispersed, Evelyn and Samuel walked along the park path, hand in hand. There was no rush to plan anything grand. No need to prove happiness to anyone. Julian Wright didn't attend. He didn't send a message. He didn't interrupt. He didn't exist in this moment at all. And that was the most fitting consequence of all. Weeks later, the final legal notice arrived. Brief, definitive. Julian's remaining petitions were denied. Supervised visitation remained in place. His appeals exhausted. Evelyn placed the document in a drawer and closed it without ceremony. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Leo, helping him with a science project. He looked up suddenly. "Mom," he said, "are we okay now?" She met his eyes. "Yes, we're more than okay." She tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. Standing alone in the quiet apartment, Evelyn felt no urge to look back. The past had lost its grip. The future felt open, honest, earned. Some stories end with revenge. Hers ended with something better. Peace, truth, and a life no one could take from her again. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, I want you to pause for a moment. Because staying until this point usually means something. In this story touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. What Evelyn's journey reminds us is simple, but powerful. The truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs time and courage to stand. For years, she carried shame that was never hers. She didn't win by becoming louder, crueler, or more ruthless. She won by refusing to abandon herself. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Healing begins the moment we stop letting others define our worth. Another Stoic truth applies here. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Evelyn didn't destroy Julian with rage. She let reality, consistency, and integrity do the work. And in the end, what she gained wasn't just justice, it was peace, love, and a future built on honesty. If you're watching this and carrying your own quiet burden, know this. Your story isn't over just because someone tried to rewrite it. Stay steady, stay truthful, and trust that time reveals everything. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. We're grateful you stayed until the end.